Okay, so in the first video, we talked about how to do sampling, and we talked about different types of samples: fair sampling, biased sampling, and random. So this video is going to be talking more about biased sampling and what sort of bias you can have. So you've already got this copied down, so you don't need to copy it again. Okay, so statistics collected from a fair sample are likely to be close to the parameters of the population. Okay, so if we've got a fair group, then we've got a chance to be close. If it's a biased sample, then it's less likely to be close. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Come across when you're ready. So now we've got types of bias, and again, you would copy these down for your cheat sheet. So because there's so many different types. So the first one is called selection bias, and that's from the choice of the sample. So if you choose people, then you have a selection bias. You need to be talking about randoms. There's another one called design flaw, where you've got faults in the design of the survey. Like, for instance, if you ask a leading question, then you're not being fair. So what you need to do is you need to ask open questions. Okay, so that's in the design. An interview bias is the way different interviewers ask the questions to the people they're seeking information from. Recall bias is when you use the knowledge of one thing to predict another thing. So, for instance, if you're looking at people's voting choices now and use that to predict previous voting choices. So they're the first four. So copy that and come across when you're ready. A couple more. We've got completion bias when you don't have surveys finished, and non-response bias when some people in the sample don't take part. They refuse to take part. So in the end, most surveys are going to have some sort of bias. It's just a matter of recognizing that there is bias and trying to avoid it. Okay, come across when you're ready. Okay, so we've got an example for the following: state if the sampling is fair or biased, and what if there is bias, what type of bias there is. So an interviewer asked people going into the Merici canteen if they prefer Merici food or an unhealthy type of food. So having a look at this, try to predict what you think it's going to be, and then when you're ready, come back. Okay, so this one has bias, and the ones that the textbook said that these were, there is selection bias because you're asking people who are going into the canteen, so there's a selection bias there. And there's a design flaw bias because you're asking a leading question that you're sort of intimating that the Merici food is healthy because you're saying or an unhealthy food. So there's a design flaw bias and a selection bias. Okay. So come across when you're ready. Okay, next one. 2,000 phone numbers are chosen at random, and people ask what type of food they like to eat. So think about if there's any bias there or if it's fair. Okay, stop the tape and have a think about it, and then when you're ready, come back live. Okay, so the book again identifies bias in this one. There's selection bias in that you're only asking people who have telephones. There might be people who don't have telephones. And you're also going to have non-response because some people aren't going to answer the question. Or they're not going to pick up the phone, or they won't be at home when you do it. Okay. The actual question, the question's okay, because you're not suggesting what sort of food they should be eating. You're asking an open-end what type of food they like. So the question's okay, but the way you did it was not. Okay, come across when you're ready. Okay, so the next one. 200 people chosen at random from the electoral roll within one electorate, like for instance an electorate in Canberra. So within one electorate, one group of people are asked at random at home on a Sunday morning, and they're asked, if an election was held today, who would you vote for? And those people who weren't at home were contacted later that day, and the data was 190 participated and 10 refused. So think about, is there bias? And if so, what sort of bias it is, and when you're ready, come back. Okay, so again, this one has a bias, and the book says this one has bias. There's selection bias. There's selection bias if you try to extend one electorate's response to the whole country. So there is selection bias in that one. Okay. So again, as I said, most surveys will have bias, and what statisticians have to do is try to ensure that the analysis, also that the survey is not biased, and the analysis is free from bias. Okay, so here's an exercise to do, and have a go at that. Thanks, bye.